About 25 or more years ago, Sue and I decided we wanted to buy a little piece of property up in North Georgia. We really do just love the mountains. And so we found a place just outside of Blue Ridge in an area known to the locals as Caches Valley. And we bought about 1.5 acres of land, and we built a little log cabin on it. It sits right on the banks of a beautiful mountain stream called Fighting Town Creek. And we went up quite often, got to know some of the local people that were our neighbors. And none of them were more important to us, though, than Jean and Evelyn Oliver. We got to be really close with them. In fact, the land we bought used to be owned by Jean and Evelyn. It was a part of their farm. As time went by, we would go up and we'd visit with Jean and Evelyn on a pretty regular basis, and we learned all about their family. And on one of these visits, we met Evelyn's stepmother, an older lady named Maggie Chapman. Maggie was in her 80s when we first met her. She was a really slightly built woman, had a sparkle in her eye, and the aura of authority that a matriarch will often have. She was clearly loved and respected by this big family. During one such visit, we rose to leave, and Maggie looked at us and said, I wish you'd come and visit me sometime. I just live right down the road." "Well, I sure will," I responded. Now, one lesson we learned about the protocol here in the mountains: if you say you're going to do something, you better do it, because a person's word up here really matters. So a few weeks later, we paid a visit to Maggie. As we pulled off the dirt road and into the yard at Maggie's house, I noticed that she was outside working in her flower garden. She was quite a sight. She had on a homemade cotton bonnet, which shielded her face from the hot sun. She had a handful of freshly pulled weeds in her right hand, and she smiled broadly as soon as she recognized us. As we walked around her yard, she spoke of the many flowers that were there at the edge of her vegetable garden. "My relatives always plow a garden for me," she said. "I love to take care of my half-runner beans and tomatoes. I have good luck with my garden," she said. After a few more minutes of conversation, we paid our respects and began to make our way back to the car. As a way to end the conversation, I simply turned to Maggie and I said, "Maggie, what's this wildflower that's blooming here next to the road?" And suddenly, it happened. Maggie paused a long while, and then she straightened herself up and she looked me straight in the eyes and she said, "Mike, up here in the mountains, there's a different flower blooming every week from spring to the first frost, if you just bother to notice." And she turned and headed toward the house. Back in the car, Sue said, "What was that all about?" I said, "Well, I'm not so sure, but I think she just fussed at me." And so I thought about Maggie's admonition. I thought about it a lot, and I concluded that Maggie had conveyed, and rather clearly, that people from the city come up here to their mountains and we build our cabins and we take our walks along the trails and by the creeks. But do we really see the beauty that's here? We don't notice it like the locals do. She was right. We saw Maggie several times after that, and we always knew we were friends, but I never forgot Maggie's challenge: if you just bother to notice. So I made up my mind on that day to look for the beauty in every single trip that we made to Caches Valley, to find those newly blooming wildflowers that Maggie spoke of. We bought several books so that we could learn their names, and I purchased 2 special lenses for my camera so that I could photograph every new flower that I found. To my amazement, I found and photographed over 100 different flowers that first year alone. The colors were brilliant and easily covered every hue in the rainbow, and the names were special too: Nodding Trillium, Fire Pink, Dwarf Crested Iris, Snake Root, Foxglove, Mayapple, Doll's Eyes, Wild Ginger, Bleeding Heart. ironweed, and on it went. Once when I was telling Evelyn and Maggie about discovering a tall, purple blooming flower, I called it Joe Pye weed. She quickly corrected me in saying, up here, we call that Queen of the Meadow. So I think the local name is much more appropriate than the one I found in my flower book. And Sue and I will always appreciate the lesson taught to us by Maggie and reinforced by Jean and Evelyn.